Welcome back to Project CD Chronicles, or welcome if this is your first time. In this video, we're going back to talk about the Amiga. We'll be talking about many Amigas, many operating systems. So you see, I've picked out a list of some operating systems for the Amiga. We won't be analyzing all of them in detail, but we'll start to get an overview of which and how many operating systems there currently are for Amiga, almost like a Linux distribution state. Stay with me until the end because we'll try to visit the websites, maybe see some of them in action installed here, dig into some details and differences. Ready? Let's go. Of course, we couldn't start anywhere else but here, which is Amiga. In fact, it's a foundation that, as you can see, was established at the end of the 1980s as an independent portal dedicated to all Amiga users. And here it started, as you can see, in 1994. When Amiga had already gone bankrupt and was kept alive, and is still kept alive, only by enthusiasts. In fact, Amiga's very passion is to become a meeting place for those who wanted and still want to connect and share. When it comes to news, software, grids, guides, and technical support. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The site is organized into thematic sections, and it basically reflects what users want. Information about hardware, software, various operating systems, development, retro computing, and maybe even buy and sell ads. Now let's briefly browse through some sections. Here you can see the forum, which brings together a whole group of veterans who actually lived through the golden age of the Amiga, as well as new and curious users who are discovering the machine through FPGA emulation, Amiga Forever, Minister of Vampire, and so on. Obviously, we have a lot of contributions here. Of course, we won't go through everything here, but users share technical guides, repairs, OS configurations, software, and even tools they've developed themselves, as well as news, fairs, events, and lots of discussions, because this section is very extensive. So even today, as you can see here, October 6th to 7th, these posts are really just a few hours old. There are many discussions specifically about the Amiga, and that's really the true spirit of this vibrant community. It's very international, with dedicated users hailing from the USA, Europe, and even distant Japan. The overall tone, as I was carefully reading through the various posts, is often quite nostalgic, but please be aware that it's not just solely about cherished memories. There are also many new and innovative projects being actively developed and discussed. Of course, let's go over some more detailed information. It's clearly a highly technical forum, as I mentioned before, with several dedicated and well-organized sections, including a comprehensive marketplace section, as well as an informative wiki, up-to-date news, and regular updates on various hardware products and much more. There's also a specific page where I personally submitted my registration, and a very active Facebook page dedicated to these passionate users, to this wonderful group, let's say. But let's get back to us. What is the real strength here? So, going back to the beginning, first of all, this contains a historical memory from people who actually lived through that era of the Amiga, of its golden age, with first-hand accounts, as you might say. You will get a lot of technical support from professionals in this case. The Quick also uses it. It's also a networking platform that enables the exchange of information between developers. It's one of the most active sites. I won't add anything else. This was a quick overview of the site, and I'd say it's time to think about our journey through the various Amiga operating systems, because that's the focus of today's video. How could I not start from Hyperion Entertainment when it comes to Amiga? So let's start getting to the heart of the Amiga topic and talk about Hyperion Entertainment, which has played its own role from a historical perspective, and also in the controversies that have surrounded and still surround the Amiga ecosystem. Let me give you a brief overview, a bit of a historical and maybe technical excursus, and I'll analyze some pros and cons. So it should be said that Hyperion Entertainment, and as for the current situation, maybe we'll discuss that in another video. It's a software house, a dedicated development studio that was originally founded in Belgium around the year 1999 or perhaps 2000. This particular company specializes in the intricate process of porting certain video games, especially for platforms like Amiga and Linux. Here, I've already had the opportunity to look at a few compelling examples. For instance, we have the classic title Heretic, which is a well-known Hyperion game, but we also discover Shogo, Mobile Armored Division, and you can certainly see this particular part in much more detail. That's precisely how it all started. Then, in the early 2000s, there was a significant turning point, and they began the crucial process of developing Amiga OS 4 under an official license from Amiga Inc. Here you can see Amiga OS 4.1 Final Edition, which is designed to run on PowerPC hardware, on accelerator cards, and then on dedicated systems like the Amiga 1, SAM, the X1000, and the 5000. And of course, we all know that this also marked the beginning of a counterpart of legal conflicts from 2007 onwards. Hyperion entered into a long legal battle with Amiga Inc. precisely over these rights to Amiga OS. Agreements, legal disputes. In any case, Hyperion, in fact, retains the right to develop and market what is Amiga OS 4.x. Today, we can clearly see that the official website is still very much active and operational, though updates are now more infrequent and the community still widely perceives some significant issues related to Hyperion. Lately, the entire system has been somewhat at a complete standstill, experiencing a noticeable lack of progress. Or at least development has slowed down a bit. We might indeed come back to these particular aspects once certain significant matters are finally and completely resolved. For now, we absolutely won't discuss anything else at all. Okay. But the focus is on operating systems, so let's talk about Amiga OS, in this case 4.1. When we refer to 4.x, there's no doubt that there has been a modernization compared to what Amiga used to be, meaning version 3. PowerPC support was added, and this is important, as well as the integrated TCP/IP stack for better memory management. Check out my videos on Linux, which I'll link in the description. Also, Hyperion has ported a lot of software specifically to keep the scene alive with modern games and applications designed for Amiga. We also have dedicated hardware support, thanks to some collaboration, though a bit behind. Here you can see they're talking about 3.2, the new ownership with Aeon. In any case, there was collaboration with Aeon and Acube for systems like the Amiga 1, X1000, X5000, and 460. What can I say? The technical limitation, in my opinion, could be the questionable choices made as far back as the early 2000s, which are now completely marginal compared to the X76RM, so the PowerPC architecture was set up, but initially with limited compatibility. I don't want to say anything incorrect, so please correct me if I'm wrong on the details, but Amiga OS 4 only runs on certified packages, which makes adoption difficult. As I've already mentioned, development has been slow, and even today, in 2025, we would expect, in fact, more modern services to keep the operating system alive. I won't add anything else because we still have a lot to talk about. Undoubtedly, Hyperion Entertainment played a fundamental role in bringing Amiga OS into the PowerPC era, but the price of certain technical and, let's say, illegal choices ultimately limited its expansion. So we have a somewhat ambivalent assessment also due to these legal issues. Without the crucial involvement of Hyperion, Amiga OS 4 probably wouldn't have truly survived. But even with the significant contributions of Hyperion, it would have unfortunately remained confined to a much more limited and restrictive architecture because, clearly, in order to bring Amiga OS 4 everywhere to other operating systems, the work, time, and resources required become enormous. Okay, quick overview. Let's move on to other operating systems now. And voila! Another operating system, as you can see here, Aros, which is also purchased by Cloanto, Amiga Forever. We may also return to analyze some more practical aspects. Now, let's go to what is the Aros website anyway. As you can see, aros.org, I have already selected some tabs. Let's say the story begins around 1995 with the acronym Amiga Research Operating Systems, later called ARONS. The goal is to recreate a system compatible with Amiga OS 3.1, but importantly, open source and portable. There has nevertheless been community-driven development for Aros because it doesn't have a real company behind it, but rather a network of volunteer developers. Aros is designed to run, as far as the 68K is concerned, on multiple architectures: ARM, PowerPC, x86, and 64-bit x86. Let's say that in recent years, and here we're specifically talking about the period around 2010, it has become much more widely popular because it was made fully compatible with both classic Amiga hardware, but especially with a branch of FPGA and Vampire. Now take a look at the video, especially the one about Apollo OS, where I went into this in more depth because Apollo OS is based on Aros and specifically develops it to try to give us a new Amiga with a 68080. I'll also leave the link in the description here. Obviously, what are the main features of Aros? It aims to be binary compatible with Amiga OS 3.1 and therefore especially with the M68K. It features a modular architecture. The libraries are written in C with more readable and maintainable code. But as I already mentioned regarding Apollo OS, since it's made for multiple operating systems and built on several layers, this can end up slowing down its performance. Regardless of Apollo OS, which is, so to speak, the evolution of Aros that inherits all its historical legacy but focuses solely on FPGA. As I already mentioned, Aros can still be ported to the standard x86, ARM architectures, PowerPC, and also to classic Amigas. It can also be used, of course, as hosted. And it can also be used like VMware, so as a virtual machine within Linux and Windows. As you have seen, and let us go back to this particular part here, the Workbench interface has been completely recreated with Wanderer, which is indeed very nice. Compared to the original Amiga operating system, it now has a very similar visual appearance and overall look, though it is obviously not entirely identical. Clearly, here too there are pros and cons. I've read on the forum that some apps are not practically or fully compatible with 3.1 or 4.0, but I'd like to check in the comments as well. We have rather limited driver support, especially when it comes to modern GPUs, and in the x86 and x64 environment, stability definitely depends on the build and the platform. Obviously, what is missing? Well, of course, this is a dedicated group of volunteers, so perhaps some more modern features are currently missing that could potentially make it seem a little bit more appealing. Alright, I'll stay here because among other things, we'll also talk about Amiga Forever later. Clearly, if I have to make a comparison with Hyperion, while Hyperion is focused on an official and commercial Amiga OS, Aros in fact has requirements of portability and open source. Aros is widely used especially in FPGA, Vampire, Apollo. I've already talked to you about these, and in any case, it has a very strong community. And in fact, it represents what is the largest open source, free portable, and Amiga compatible project. What has somewhat slowed down its development? Well, fragmentation, the community, and the various modern drivers. At this point, ReactOS also comes to mind, just like it wanted after so many years to be compatible with Windows, but clearly here we're talking about an evolution, and it's also difficult to keep up with the times. Alright, we've talked about a lot of things. Let's move on to other operating systems. Okay, now we're on MorphOS, and we can define it as another spiritual child of Amiga. MorphOS, but there is a lot of information you can find on the website. It was created much earlier than others, already at the end of the 1990s. It was born from the idea of Ralph Schmidt and former Phase 5 developers who produced accelerator cards for Amiga. Then we actually have, you can also see it here in the overview and in the videos, but this is all public information. Around the year 2000, let's say, specifically in that era, MorphOS, a notable operating system, saw its first official releases. These initial versions, such as 0.1 and 0.2, were always designed for Amiga systems equipped with PowerPC cards. And then we moved into the 2000s. when Amiga Inc., the company itself, considers MorphOS as a base for what we've already discussed, which is the Amiga 4, but in this case the negotiations fail. It's worth mentioning that the history of Amiga has been fragmented by ups and downs and by many legal battles that are still ongoing today. Let's move forward anyway. MorphOS then goes through a period in which it is adopted, especially by a certain company. Pegasus, wait a moment while I go check the link. I'll share this site with you, Amiga.it. It's part 7 of the history because it's really well done and I got a lot of information from here. Then in the following years, MorphOS 1 finally arrives, which brings some consolidation, and then comes MorphOS 2, which is still around today. In the scene, it was officially announced that there would be a migration to the x64 platform. The very latest release, if I am not mistaken, was indeed in May of 2023, and right here you can clearly see the dedicated download section for it. Here are some images of MorphOS. Of course, it supports a huge number of file systems. Amiga's SFS, various Unix file systems, FAT, NTFS, as well as Linux's X2 and X3. It also notably possesses excellent and comprehensive support for virtually all Radeon graphics cards, and according to some reliable information and recent reports, this even extends to the more contemporary and recently released models. And it also has good support for USB, networking, and audio. Obviously, the interface, we can also significantly enlarge it here, and it's definitely a very modern desktop environment. Moreover, even on older, less powerful hardware, MorphOS is quite remarkably fast. It truly excels in its exceptional compatibility with all Amiga software, especially on PowerPC systems. Other notable features I have read about include it's quite stable, which is indeed very important, so system crashes are not a common occurrence at all. And as it's often described, I just read it here in fact, it offers an undeniably excellent and highly satisfying user experience. Here are the various features, which I've already briefly talked about, and here they're presented in much more comprehensive detail. Alright, let's move on to the next topic.
Well, in our exploration, I would have liked to include this operating system as well, but maybe we'll come back to it if it's requested in the comments, EmuTOS, because here we're moving. Even though we have a Motorola 680X and the Coldfire, we're shifting from the Amiga world in particular to the Atari world. So just a brief description, because in fact EmuTOS, which was previously known as the operating system or TOS, was created as an open source project with the goal of making all these products, especially the ROMs, freely usable. The aim was to provide a ROM replacement for the old TOS 2.0. It started out to be used on real hardware, but it also took on the identity of EmuTOS because it began to develop a whole range of emulation components. It's written in C, assembly, and of course for the 68K. I won't say or add anything else. Obviously, you can download it. And here there are various other features and benefits. Then we can look at the graphical interface, which has a bit of a retro style and so on. But let's continue our overview of Amiga OS operating systems. Alright, now let's talk about who actually owns the Amiga ROMs, which is Cloanto, with two products, Amiga Forever and Commodore 64 Forever. I've already talked about this extensively in a video, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description. Apparently they're also in negotiations with the revived Commodore, probably to, let's say, expand their products and become a single unified collection, but we still have to wait for a few minor legal issues to be resolved, always with Hyperion and so on. I won't add anything else except to say that here we have the complete suite of machines from the Amiga PowerPC to the Amiga 4000, all original, but I've already talked about this in a video and I'll leave you the link in the description. There really are so many of these operating systems. This Amiga project is less official compared to Hyperion, Aros, MorphOS or others, but its goal is to make the Amiga experience accessible on PC and modern operating systems. Clearly, I've selected a lot of panels because there's so much to say here. We have a beginning. We're around what it says here. It talks about beginning 2004. but the origins are roughly in 2003, created by György Balázs, I hope that's how you pronounce it, a Hungarian developer anyway. And at the beginning, it was a pre-configured package for Amiga emulators, particularly for WinUAE. What was or what is the goal? That's basically it. To offer an Amiga OS operating system ready to use with a modern interface, as you can see here in more detail on the official page, modern, with pre-installed software, Workbench, and so on. Amiga Sys boot logo, Amiga Sys OS 3.0, 3.1. You can see the interface is really well done, beautiful, modern. Its popularity, by the way, is quite high among those who wanted to relive the Amiga experience on PC without having to go through and configure a lot of stuff. Over time, and here I think we're at 4.1, so we've moved from version 1 to 4, we've reached what is an Amiga SIS with significant improvements in all aspects: hardware, software, integrated packages, and so on. Obviously, Amiga 6, let's say, is not a standalone OS, but has a configuration package that requires the original key starts and Workbench precisely for legal reasons, and as I showed you earlier, these belong to Cloanto. Clearly, it works on all emulators, WinUAE, FSUAE, and UAE, as well as on real operating systems with a hard disk. Nothing more to add. There are several configurations already ready to use. And here too we could really talk about a lot of material available, but this is obviously just an overview, and maybe we'll come back to it in more detail, perhaps even with a direct installation. What else can we say about this information? What was its practical role? In fact, Amiga with this very operating system lowered the barrier. It undoubtedly lowered the entry barrier for anyone who wanted to try Amiga on a PC, becoming what was essentially a sort of pre-packaged Amiga distro, so to speak. Of course, you could compare it with other projects. Oh, I was just reading here. Well, I lost track of them for a moment, but I'll find them again. Projects like Classic Workbench or Coffin OS, which have taken similar paths, but Amiga Sys was undoubtedly one of the first and most widespread. I'd like to point out that Amiga Sys isn't exactly a new operating system, but rather a pre-configured Amiga OS 3.x environment, which also includes 4, of course, that made the Amiga experience much more accessible to enthusiasts and to those using real hardware. Well, of course, we could talk, or rather, we couldn't not talk, about AmiKit, which is truly a fundamental piece in recreating the Amiga experience, especially on modern PCs. Unlike what we've already discussed with Amiga Sys, let's say this is a very, very polished project. You could even call AmiKit the luxury edition of the Amiga experience compared to Amiga Sys. In fact, you can see on today's agenda we also have all the various stores, pStorm, then Raspberry, Vampire, but we'll get to those details in a moment. From a historical perspective, it was created by Zian from Slovakia, who also aimed to offer a new pre-configured package, and it was the evolution of what was MigKit from version 1 up to today. By the way, we can confidently call this a truly luxury edition, which is a more advanced and comprehensive version, available for Windows, Linux, Mac OS X, and also quite remarkably for the Raspberry Pi, or offering extensive compatibility. It obviously includes third-party software with licenses, icons, graphic themes. This part, as you can see, you should definitely check out. AmiKit 12 or Aspera API, how good is this combination? AmiKit 12, I'll leave all the various and sundry links in the description below. And as of right now, so to speak, AmiKit is still actively maintained with regular updates and, above all else, comprehensive commercial support. However, it is quite clearly a paid product. Here you can plainly see the impressive Vampire accelerator card, which offers truly significant advantages. Let's say it allows us not only to significantly accelerate the Amiga system, but also to effectively emulate it, thereby providing an undeniably much better and more fluid user experience. By the way, this very same Vampire accelerator is also prominently included in the Apollo OS operating system, which I've already thoroughly talked about in a previous video presentation. Aside from the part where the Amiga has obviously made a comeback, In the meantime, I wanted to show you a few things. Here you have the whole history of AmiKit, which I had already shown you before. Okay, maybe I'll focus on this because, in fact, the interface has been completely redesigned. And here you see what is called the MUI, as you can see here, the Magic User Interface. With a modern and aesthetically pleasing icon, and in any case, a very pleasant and appealing look, and here too, within the Watch News section, it's basically a highly customized desktop environment, specifically called Directory Opus Magellan 2, which is also extensively used as the primary and main file manager for all operations. Of course, in this particular instance, we've thoughtfully included a comprehensive and complete package when it comes to various multimedia applications and their functionalities. Player, audio, video, and the graphics section, and above all, a whole package that allows us to browse the web, such as iBrowse, NetSurf, and a whole series of text editors and pre-configured system utilities. For this part as well, all the configurations are present in WinUAE, and especially for the Raspberry Pi, which I've already mentioned. What's the focus here? Well, clearly it's a paid product, but it's aimed at being what we could call a modern Amiga. Of course, anyone involved in the Amiga world has heard of Cross Desktop, which was created as a project several years ago, before 2010, by Paolo Besser, an Italian journalist and developer, with the idea of simplifying the use of Aros, VMWAros, right? At the time, it was still rough and difficult to configure, not like what we've seen earlier. So the goal was to provide a complete package with Aros already configured, including software, polished interfaces, and modern tools, so that anyone could try out a modern Amiga without various complications. The name, of course, is VMWAros because initially it was designed to run on VMware, so a virtual machine, but then it was extended to run on real PCs as well. Maybe later we'll take a look at some screenshots. The first versions were distributed on VMware. Now it is also distributed for real PCs, and it is still updated regularly. The current status, the official blog, is what we see here, and now we can also look at some more screenshots, even though we can say that the golden age of this operating system, so to speak, has passed. Of course, it is open source, compatible with AmiOS 3.1, and the main architecture is x86, as I mentioned. The desktop is called Wanderer, which is customized, and we also have built-in emulation with the Commodore's Vice emulator. We also have the appealing presence of modern graphical themes, of course. And what else can I say? Well, there's the web browser. It includes a whole range of multimedia tools, text editors, and pre-configured Amiga Lite applications. It can be installed and is also available for download with ready-to-use images for VMware and VirtualBox, as I mentioned, and it can also be installed on real PCs. In the meantime, let's move on to this part. Obviously, I can only add thank you VMware Arons. It was, so to speak, an Aros distribution that obviously had a significant and fundamental impact in making the Amiga-like experience more accessible to the modern world, especially to PCs and virtual machines. Its main strength, of course, is its ease of use, as well as the interface, as we've seen here. The limitations clearly which stem from this, and we've already talked about them, are mainly related to Aros on PC. Obviously, the drivers are still incomplete, development is slow, it's layered, and compatibility is still only partial. However, there have been various successors to Aros. Let me remind you again of Apollo OS. Well, let's continue our fascinating and comprehensive magical overview with Amiga OS, which is obviously and expertly managed by Hyperion Entertainment, a company we've already discussed and mentioned in previous segments. Regarding Hyperion as well, it actually originated with the Amiga 1000 in 1985 as a proprietary operating system based on Exec, Intuition, and World Bank, evolving under Commodore until 1994. Then, of course, Commodore went bankrupt. Here we have the final edition, but we've already talked about it. Amiga OS, starting from version 3.1, enters the whole post-Commodore era. Here, once again, we're talking about Hyperion Entertainment, which essentially holds the license. Then there was the legal case, then another legal case. Amiga OS Net, I'll add this as well, was created as the official site to provide information, news, changelogs, and downloads specifically related to this operating system. The site is still online, but updates are more than rare. By the way, I should mention the use of 3D animation tools like Blender, really the top software for 3D modeling, and the main uses are internet browsing and of course PageStream, which is paid. There's extensive 68K emulation, Amiga OS 4 extensive capabilities on Apple, full field for need, running classic Amiga software, so we have excellent compatibility. I already mentioned the integrated TCP stack, graphics support. Here we're talking about Picasso 96, support for modern file systems, and USB. Well, what can I say? The hardware is limited to the Amiga 1, the SAM, the X1000, the X5000, and we've already talked about those. Moving on, Classic Workbench, it's worth saying that it's a very beloved project in the classic Amiga world. It's one of the most widespread Workbench distros, designed for those who want a ready-to-use, optimized and enriched Amiga 3.x environment without having to manually configure tools and so on. Here, I've already selected some images for you. The project by Saragliani 2000 includes the Blood Witch initiative, which is the nickname of the main developer, and the goal is to provide a pre-configured workbench for WinUAE, FSUAE emulators, and also for real Amigas. So, like many tools we've discussed, the aim is to provide and especially simplify life for users, offering a turnkey OMI, Amiga 3 system, and so on, with a modern interface, software included, and various optimizations. Over time, several functions and different editions have been released. Here, for example, we have the Line, the DV, the DVSP. There are really a lot of them. If I can show you, here are all these editions because as of 2020, obviously, the current state is that the site, ClassicAnime.net, still collects the available versions, guides, and documentation. Clearly, the base requirement for all this software is the original Amiga Workbench and ROMs, which for legal reasons are not included and, as I mentioned, always belong to Clonto. Well, what else can I say? There's the light version for systems with limited space and the full version with software and a complete set of libraries. Thank you, Sankey. And then we have all the various compatibilities and so on, as well as the functionality and compatibility tied to the different emulators, WinUAE, FSUAE, and even, believe it or not, real Amigas. I won't add anything else. Classic Workbench was, for me, obviously the simplest solution because I wanted a boosted Amiga ready to use. Well, stay with me. Let's move on. A very quick overview of just a few more operating systems without going into the more Unix and Unix-like features. Of course, Linux couldn't be missing from this channel. And speaking of Amiga Linux and the 68K architecture, no, obviously. Let's talk about what Linux M68K is, and clearly this is a historic project that made it possible to bring Linux to the Motorola 68080, the same family used by Amiga, Atari ST, Macintosh, and NeXT, okay? Briefly, the history. This project started around the 1990s, so 1991, and it was created as an official port for these machines. Initially, the supported machines were all those with processors from the 68000 onwards, so Linux was basically ported to machines like the Atari ST, Falcon, Amiga, and so on. Let's say, for example, it's a Debian-like distribution, and it truly allows you to have a so-called modern system, still running effectively on the Linux machine, providing a robust and up-to-date experience. Announced in version 2.2, clearly the website is still frozen. Here I saw that it's from April 2000. Currently, the project is still maintained as a historical port of the Linux kernel, even though today it's a niche project, mainly for enthusiasts, and is seen as a way to preserve what the project once was. Well, now we move on to the last one, which clearly here as well is about NetBSD Amiga. And finally, we've reached the end. I think by now I've lost most of the YouTube viewers at this point, but let's also talk about Unix on Amiga. This project actually started as a fork of D386 BSD at the time, so we have to go back to 1994 when Commodore had gone bankrupt with the goal of creating a portable Unix live system for many architectures. But in practice, I don't know if it really worked out, and so this project was started already as a port in those years for FreeBSD Amiga, which in BSD today is clearly there for network support. But in any case, it's not easy to use, and even less so with modern hardware. Obviously, it works in the server environment. Of course, it's an integral part of the NetBSD project, which is a pure FreeBSD Unix, and so it runs the official releases. Nothing more to say. I won't dwell on it further because it was just a final piece of information. That's it, I'd say. We've added a lot to the table. We've taken a look at the many Amiga operating systems out there, and I went a bit overboard because there are so many operating systems. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment if you want, because we'll be diving deeper into some operating systems later on and bringing you more information about the Amiga world. What else can I say? Finally, I can thank you all for staying with me until the end of the video, and I'll see you soon with another video on projectCD.Chronicles. Thanks, everyone.